Okay, welcome to part 3B of this beginner's guide series on photography. I'm going to pick up where I left off in part 3A with the low light shooting tips. In part 3A we got to the point where we were taking reasonable shots in low light, but we'd still got some graininess in the image. And today I'm going to take you through a slightly more advanced method for getting rid of that remaining grain in the image and giving us a sharper image. So in the previous video we were shooting in the flash off mode, and the camera was taking about half a second to take the photo. So the camera was automatically adjusting the lens settings to let in the maximum amount of light that the lens could achieve. It was, as I say, taking longer to take the shot, and that was the second way that it was gathering more light. The third thing that it was doing, and this is what was causing the grain in the image, was it was increasing automatically what's known as the ISO setting. And the ISO setting is effectively the camera adjusting the brightness of the image, which unfortunately brings with it a problem of a grainy image. So the only way to keep the camera's ISO setting low is to force the camera to take even longer to take the photo than the half a second or so that it was taking in the last image that I showed you in part 3A. So in order to tell the camera that we're going to allow it to take even longer over the shot, and therefore to enable it to bring down the ISO number, we first need to switch the camera into the mode that's labelled TV. TV stands for time value. The second thing we need to do is we need to mount the camera on something that's stable. Typically photographers will use a tripod. There are plenty of videos on YouTube about how to choose a tripod, but you basically just need something that's nice and sturdy, because with this entry-level camera, with the entry-level lens, with this setup, the camera is potentially going to take several seconds over taking the shot, and it's just not going to be feasible to handhold the camera, keep it perfectly still for several seconds. So what I did was I switched the camera into TV mode, I mounted it on a tripod, and once I switched it into TV mode, this is what I saw on the camera's display. The number in the top left hand corner of the display is now highlighted. That will typically show a fraction, and that represents a fraction of a second, and that's how long the camera is going to take over capturing the image. Now in TV mode, by rotating the dial that I introduced you to in part 2 when we were controlling the aperture of the camera, by rotating this dial we can control how long the camera takes over taking the photo. Now in this next video sequence I want you to look at two numbers on the display. The number in the top left is the amount of time that the camera is taking over the photo, and we're starting at a 20th of a second, and we're going to go all the way through to 2.5 seconds. And at the same time I want you to look at the number in the top right of the display. That is the camera's ISO number that I mentioned. Now that number is going to start at 3200. Now that's quite a high ISO number, and at 3200 we're going to get a lot of grain in the image. But as I slow down the shutter speed from 1/20th of a second through to 1 second, you'll see that the ISO number will come down from 3200 down to 200, which is a perfectly acceptable ISO number, which is going to give us minimal grain. but as I go beyond 0.8 of a second, that ISO number ceases to drop. So we've reached the minimum ISO number that the camera is going to go to in this situation, and therefore we don't need to slow the shutter speed any further. So just to recap, for this final shot, I put the camera into TV mode, mounted it onto a tripod, turned the camera on. I then rotated the dial on the camera and slowed the shutter speed down to the point where the ISO number in the top right of the display ceased to get any lower, and at that point I'm at the maximum image quality that I'm going to get. Now, in the video sequence that you just saw, once we got to about a second, the ISO number stopped falling because there was a bit more light at that time than I had out on the high street. When I was out on the high street, I had to keep rotating the dial, slowing the shutter speed until it got to 6 seconds before the ISO number dropped to 200. Once it had reached that point, I took the photo, and this is the result that I got. Now, if we quickly compare this to the final image from part 3A of this series, you can see that it's a much cleaner image, much less grainy, and we can actually read the license plate on the car, which is what we were hoping to achieve. But I did need to keep the camera perfectly still for 6 seconds. Now, in this case, I did take the photo by pressing the shutter button, but there is some potential there to cause camera shake when you're actually pressing the button on the camera. One way to get around this is to invest in one of these external remote shutter release devices. They're not expensive, but you can then take the photo without touching the camera. Alternatively, most cameras have a setting that will delay the taking of the photo, so you can hit the shutter button and then after 2 seconds or 10 seconds typically the camera will take the photo. So by introducing that lag, that time delay, the camera can take the photo without us touching any buttons and potentially introducing some vibration and hence some blur into the shot. Now, if you don't have a tripod or you can't afford a tripod, you may be able to find a nice steady surface that you can put the camera down onto and still frame your shot, and in most cases that will give you a nice sharp grain-free image as an alternative to using a tripod. I tend to find that something very sturdy like a brick wall is going to work better than a fence or a table because they can tend to move slightly while the camera's taking the shot. Anyway, that's it for this video. I wanted to keep it nice and brief because for most people the results that we're achieving in part 3A would be perfectly sufficient. Both parts 3A and this video have covered scenarios where the thing we're shooting is out of range of our flash and the thing that we're shooting is not moving. In part 3C I'm going to start looking at flash photography, which is something that's really quite tricky to master, but I'm going to hopefully give you sufficient information to enable you to shoot with flash and for the results to look reasonably pleasing. As always, I hope you found this useful, and if you did, please just take a couple of seconds to click on the like button, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. If you've got any questions or comments, please put those down below and I will respond to all polite comments. Thanks for watching. Bye.